to change that. I thought I was getting better.
Play footsie with you under the table. That'll make you feel better.
Masculinity in the modern age. Hello and welcome back to the Tickling the Void podcast with me, Shawnee Boy. This is episode 4, where we're going to be talking about, men in this dystopian nightmare, because this is a podcast about me trying to dig myself out of my existential hole that I find myself in, caused by this dystopian nightmare matrix we're all trapped in, by making a podcast exploring this dystopian nightmare matrix we're all trapped in. Just a quick plug for the Patreon, because we have a Patreon, patreon.com/ticklingthevoid. If you've been enjoying what we're doing so far, and from the feedback a lot of you have, and you want to keep us self-sustaining by the end of this trial run, then please consider just donating to the Patreon, because that covers the costs. This does cost money to do, so if we can just cover the costs, at least we can keep this going. So that'd be great. Oh, and if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever, leave us a little, rating thing, because that always comes in handy. But I guess we'll just jump into the podcast. Well, today we got a very special guest. I don't know, do you want to be called a very special guest? Is that too much?
We say I'm special now.
We've got a very special guest, Gavin Brewis, who's got a lot of interesting perspectives. He's doing a lot of interesting work. We're just going to have a chat with him. So Gavin, if you just want to introduce yourself and a bit about what you do.
So I'm Gavin Brewis. I'm a PhD researcher at GCU. My research thesis title is Trauma and Emotions in the Murder Capital of Europe, which is a new history of Glasgow's NED culture and NEDS between the years of 1995 and 2008, where I look at structural and systemic harms on a contemporary and historical basis, and I'm happy to be on today.
Good to have you in. I appreciate you coming in, man. We'll start off actually, because you've had a lot of kickback for what it is that you're doing. You get a lot of negativity just for the subject matter that you're sort of analysing. How does that make you feel? How do you approach sort of dealing with that?
Well, I think it's an interesting one, because if we look at, and I've said this a couple of times before, but if we look at punks, we look at the mods, we look at the rockers, we recognise that these are all readily accepted subcultures. But when it comes to NEDs, who are seen as being this problematised group, they're seen as being, well, they were essentially a new folk devil at the early 2000s, and I think because they're seen as being these perpetrators, they can also, there's this sort of social acceptability where we don't accept them also as being victims to systemic harms. If they are perpetuating, say, direct violence, we say, well, they can't also be victims because they're perpetrators. And I think that's where it comes into. And as you say, I've had a lot of kickback, and it's mainly people who are trying to disenfranchise them as a population and trying to say, well, it's not a subculture, they were just wee thugs, they were just wee hooligans, which are both interesting terms with their own histories, like thugs in relation to sort of India, and the hooligan element of people there, and also hooligan, which is related to sort of anti-Irish discrimination with the name hooligan as well. So NED in itself has got an interesting history. I'm not going to get away in this podcast. You need to wait for the thesis to be finished. But I think that's where it comes in. So there's this negative perspective of this young population. And because they are being violent and because they are problematic within certain things, it's kind of like, well, we don't need to humanise them. We don't need to give them a voice. We don't need to allow them certain spaces to exist in, because then that would just be normalising them. But they should be normalised the same as any youth culture, as I say. So
do you think, what people's experience, because clearly I've had my experiences with them, and a lot of it wasn't pleasant, sadly, but do you think people's experiences of that then just overrides any sort of compassion or ability to look deeper at what causes that, the root causes that, the environmental factors and all that sort of stuff?
Well, I mean, a big argument is we're all shaped by our environment, we're all shaped by social factors, we're all shaped by our socialisation and our experiences. So I'd say it's normal that people are going to kick back and reject a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about on the basis that they have been potentially harmed by this group. So I understand that, but I also think that it's a bit strange sometimes when you hear people who claim to be socialists and be on the left and understand that systemic harms can create systemic violence essentially creates a harm for individuals. Then I think we do a lot of disservice to people, and it's not just NEDs, but it's also people from different backgrounds and different sort of cultures as well, where we see, again, it comes back to the idea of social acceptability. It's like, well, we don't like these people, so we can't then humanise them. And I think there's an inconsistency in a lot of the theoretical approaches of some of the left as well. And you just need to look at that Reddit thread, and they were talking about, and I'm talking about the after the War and NEDS blog that I published, and a lot of the kickback was, well, I'm actually left wing, but these people were just wee arseholes. You're like, well, where's your theory now? Where's all the stuff that you've been arguing for decades to say, well, capitalism does create these harms for individuals, and it creates certain behaviours because through individualism, through this fucking harsh environment, it's going to produce harsh people. And that's what's kind of missing with it. And so, as I say, I think there's quite a few inconsistencies when it comes to NEDS. And my argument is that it's because it is a very lower class population. Some people would call it underclass. I would like to call it just lower working class. And because I find that most of my participants that I spoke to are actually working now anyway, so it doesn't really fit that model. It comes down to a morality issue, which is central to a lot of the arguments made against them as well.
And that's, as you say, that sort of analytical approach for everything else takes a lot of that stuff into consideration. And it's just a strange thing. Like, even if you are having negative experiences stuff, and surely it's worthy of understanding that, because it's part of society, which is part of us, and it sort of just gives people a lot of an acceptability to just utterly dismiss these experiences. And it's a lot of hypocrisy as well. How are we supposed to move forward together in a traditional leftist sort of framework when we can just easily dismiss all these people? Because I've known people who, they were in those sort of groups, they were in those gangs and stuff. I said gangs, that's me in trouble now, right?
No, I mean, they were gangs, let's face it. There's the gang element was an important element of that culture. To be a NED, though, didn't mean you had to be in a gang.
Yeah, it's not.
But usually you were. But subcultures are subcultures, but that was... The gangs existed before NEDS in Glasgow. Let's remember it was traditional. So there's a territorial sort of historical aspect there, which is traditional in the Glasgow sense, not just for NEDS, but for generations before. And that's why people who grew up in some of the working class areas, some people were talking to me and tell me, and even myself, my granddad grew up in the Wine Alley, so he hung about with the Winey boys when he was younger. And if they'd not moved away, then that would have been the case for me, probably growing up in that same area. That's what you've seen. There's a generational sort of membership within certain gangs, but that's not the pinnacle of what NED culture is. NED culture was all the aesthetics, the music taste, and everything else which makes up a subculture. So because I know people who, from an early age, they're in that environment, and you get taken down paths which affect later life before they've even come to any sort of proper consciousness. And so to not understand that and to not look at the wider system is a real failing of society. It's just allowing all this stuff to happen and all the effects that causes, and then claim that you're some sort of progressive individual who cares about helping people. You're missing a big gap of Scottish experience. But I think it's important to understand the evolution of youth culture first and foremost, because when we understand the evolutions, we can understand how it starts and the existence of the populations in question, because then we can learn from it. And we were just talking about there, we can't sanitise history, we need to discuss it, we need to go into depth with it, because it teaches about the future. We can learn from the past, and then we can learn to deal with it, handle it, and also try and limit it for being so problematic. But that's not just on the youth populations as well who are developing. Obviously, when I say we need to learn from it and how to handle it, I'm talking about on a governmental level as well, because for a lot of them, buying into these moral panics, or what I would argue, engineering moral panics for political gain, that stuff is something that we need as a population as well, of citizens need to call that stuff out when we see it as well. And just for context, and for anybody that's read that War and NEDS blog, in the early 2000s, Jack McConnell had his War and NEDS in 2003. Whereas in the past, with moral panics, it was usually the media stirring up sensationalism.
Aye.
But in 2003, the Scottish Executive actually asked the Daily Record to help them stir up this sensationalism. And then the Daily Record came out and says, we're going to take in all your letters, tell us what you want done about these wee NEDs. So they were inspiring, they were encouraging people to come in and talk negatively in that sense, and they were emboldened by the government for actually doing it. So you had people writing in and saying, well, we want to microchip the NEDs, we want to tag them. Do you know what I mean? Fucking microchipping people, put them in national service, which is also always a big one. And then there was people talking about beating up the NEDs, beating up these young people. And let's remember, like, a lot of these people who were deemed as NEDs are fucking 12, 13, 14 and 15 year old. You're talking about minors, and you're getting people trying to justify violence against them. Yep. And of course that's what happened as well. We've seen police violence, we've seen sort of violence against people who are in charge of driving people back and forward to the courts, i.e. Resilience and Serco and things like that. So this all had a material impact, this ideological narrative that was being peddled by the likes of Labour at the time, or New Labour, under Jack McConnell. And he's been made a Lord now. So
he's in touch with the people.
Exactly. There's a big detachment, and I think it comes down to how this group of people were perceived, because it was the middle class people they were talking about. It was people who'd came for these schemes in these places of spatial and social discredit. So there's sort of stigmatisation in entire areas. And I mentioned the Wine Alley. The Wine Alley is nicknamed the Wine Alley because its reputation, the tonic wine, through the ages. Its original name was Moore Park. But we see that within different areas, these sort of bad reputations, negative reputations. And off the top of my head, you can think of Gavin, think of Pollock, think of the Gobbles, think of Easterhouse. All these places have had their moral panics around them. And that doesn't go away. That has a lasting spatial discredit. So the people growing up in the environments are automatically targeted and seen as being negative or bad people, because if they hang about in the streets, if they're dressed in a certain way, if they talk in a certain way, they fit all these sort of characteristics which are easily scapegoated and manipulated. And I think that's what we've seen. And as I said, I don't deny that there was a lot of problems from these groups, but that was a societal thing. That was something that happened, and it has happened through Glasgow's history as well. And we're starting to see a re-emergence of it now, and that's why I think my research is coming at a good time, because we can start to understand how do we deal with it, how do we go about approaching this in a way we're not going to perpetuate sort of deviance amplification, where people are going to start acting out because of those systemic failures and additional oppression that they're going to face.
I was just going to say that it creates like a negative loop, where, you know, if you are deemed to be, you know, a problem for the state or whatever, and you're getting all that, you know, all that media attention on you, then you're going to kick back instinctively, and that just creates a wider divide, and you're not going to address any of the problems. And for the government to do that, it's just basically an abdication of responsibility for, you know, it's politics and it's the economy which contributes significantly to a lot of this deprivation. And then you don't want to deal with that. You just look at the surface level bit and go, oh, that's the problem, you know?
Well, that's it. And the talk that I gave in the college the other week, I was talking about this intergenerational psychosocial trauma, and my view is that these systemic harms and this systemic violence, which isn't just contemporary but historical as well, we view this as just normalised. But yet we look at the surface level, as you mentioned there, so we look at direct violence rather than looking at the structural and the systemic violence, which produces or at least caters for these behaviours. And the system, in many ways, I believe it requires this, because we need our prisons full. We need to have loads of prisoners and criminals, because we need additional police, we need extra people working in the jails, we need to keep people employed. It's the same as poverty in that respect, in my view, as well. Even the welfare system, which people are always slaughtered for being on welfare, on benefits and things like that. And obviously you had benefit streets, you had benefits cheats, all this kind of thing. But yet if you look at the system and the work of Louis Vuitton, his work says, well, we actually need the benefit system, and that encourages, or it keeps going, this system of consumerism as well. So people like to talk about, they were dressed like this, they're always dressed in this kind of fashion, this kind of dress sense. Well, you've been telling people to do that for fucking centuries. Do you know what I mean? Meet that consumerist ideal. Doesn't just happen by chance, it's by design. So I think there's a lot of systemic harms inflicted, and the individuals who are essentially buying into the narratives that are peddled towards them are getting blamed for it.
Right. It's the difference between we'll jump to America. I know we shouldn't be jumping to America, but like the rap culture and the mansions and all the rest of it, and the bling and all the rest of it, and that's frowned upon as uncouth or whatever, and yet whatever middle class and upper middle class people want to be spending their money on, that's deemed acceptable. That's deemed, even though it's the exact same mechanisms which cause it. It's just another level of hypocrisy and another level of sort of being able to demonise people from not being, the comfortable sort of middle classes.
People forget that the advertising exists for a reason. It encourages consumerism, and we're a consumerist society. That's why you always get the reports like high street sales are down, online sales are down, which just came out recently. There's a big uproar and there's a big scale when this is happening. So what is it they want? Who is it that is the people that are no spending then? Are they wanting poor people to spend their money on this sort of stuff, or don't they want people to spend their money on this stuff? And as you say there's certain hierarchies of dress and activities and leisure and all this kind of thing where certain people can act and behave in certain ways, but then when it comes to the lower working classes doing the exact same things. And you just need to look at the rugby. There was a fucking video not that long ago where a guy's getting pissed and he's apparently had his bobby out and all that stuff on at the rugby, but it was just accepted because it's just lad behaviour at the rugby. It's just what the posh boys do. But you do that at the football, you're getting a sentence. Do you know what I mean? Yep. That's indecent exposure. You're getting a couple of fucking months for that. It's just a complete different perspective based on the class that you come from. That's a class system, and we need to remember that those in charge of the courts or those running the courts, the police officers, they're all working for the system. They're not working for the working classes, and that's something what I think is important to remember in any analysis of youth populations. And as I said, we've seen it all before. The mods, the rockers, the punks, all these face the same systemic levels of harm, and they might have expressed their resistance slightly differently, but the same systemic harms existed, and that's where the relationship comes with NEDS and the like.
So how have you found, just on a personal basis, how have you found your experience going into academia and being in the position that you're in? Because it's, as we were speaking earlier, it's quite a responsible position in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I've found it alright. I hear a lot of people talking about they don't really feel accepted in education, but I feel because of my uni that I went to, Glasgow Caledonian University, and I've done my masters in Strathclyde as well, I've never felt alienated maybe in the same way as some people have spoken about. I always felt that I was kind of readily accepted. Maybe that's because of my previous life before that. Before going into academia, I made that a wee bit easier because I was used to being in a regimented system. I was used to following a structure. I think if I'd maybe done that 10 years prior, I probably wouldn't have been able to handle it as well, because I wouldn't have had that same mindset of being structured and creating an easier sort of timetable for myself. Do you know what I mean? Time management is a massive thing and most things, but especially when you're doing academia, you need to be able to juggle loads of different work, and you need to be able to say, right, well, I'm prioritising this and I'm putting this secondary. And I think because I was able to live like a wee bit of life and relatively alright life as well, which I wouldn't have been afforded if I never got away for Glasgow, to be fair. But I think that having those experiences and moved back into academia made it a lot easier. And also, I think it was also the fact that I was given a chance by somebody. Aye. And there was a guy, Jim O'Donovan, before I'd went to college, City of Glasgow College that I was at. I'd applied for every college gone. I had no qualifications. I was kicked out at 14 for school. So I got no college were accepting me when I reapplied as an adult, apart from City of Glasgow. And it was Jim O'Donovan who said, he got me in, he says, I know you've not got any formal qualifications, but he says, did you write this this sort of fucking, what is it again,
personal statement thing?
Aye, that's it, your personal statement. So he says, did you write this? I said, aye, I wrote it. And he said, it was one of the best that we received. And he said, I'm going to give you a chance. And I think that played a big role in how I approached it, because I realised that every other college knocked me back apart from this one. I'm talking about, I'd applied for HND, HNC, NC, even the sort of entry level ones, and even though they knocked me back and City of Glasgow took me in a HND, So I think being given that opportunity was massive, and a lot of people talk about not feeling in place in university, and also I think a lot of it comes down to not having that opportunity. So I always see myself as being very lucky. Even when I done my masters, I had good grades anyway. I could have went to most of them. I'd got a first class. I'd won best history dissertation in my uni, so that gave me a lot of options. But even when it came to my PhD, my one of my old lecturers, Una Walsh, she'd got in touch with me, says, well, there's these PhDs gone, scholarships, why don't you apply for them? So I did, and then I was lucky enough to get one through the uni. So I think without those people there, I wouldn't have. I would. This is all like life in general. Although you're, you kind of know you want to do something, you also need to have that opportunity to do it in the first place. And sometimes that comes through people just being nice and helping and being helpful towards you. So that's always kind of try to do the same now. So if people I know are in a situation where they need help with something, I will always try and pass that on, because I feel as if a lot of people have done that with me, and I think that's the kind of way in academia as well. So my journey's been a wee bit a weird one, but as I say, without that opportunity and without realising that without those people saying, well, I give them a chance, I would have done nothing. You know, I don't know where I'd have been. I would have probably just been I was quite lucky, and I managed to get myself a couple of courses and that stuff, but I wasn't enjoying it. This is what I wanted to do. And as I said, it's easy for people to say you just need to work hard, but it's not just about working hard, it's about people actually seeing something in you and also getting that opportunity and grabbing it with both hands and going, well, this is my priority. And as I said, you need to prioritise. And that's kind of what I've done. I just prioritise my work. I've kind of, the last fucking 8 years or so, I've not really had much of a social life, to be honest. But I think the further you get on, this becomes your social life. And the friends that I've got now, a lot of them are through university and through that sort of socialisation within that environment. But I always feel like without the help, I wouldn't have been here. So my journeys in academia, I've found it really good. It's really encouraging, because before I came to academia and before I was in university, and I'd have probably fucking slagged students, and I'd have slagged like sort of professors and all that, said, oh, they're fucking posh and whatever else. But there's actually a lot of really good working class people in there, and even it doesn't even matter, not even working class people, there's a lot of middle class people as well who go out their way to help you and all. So I think it kind of challenged a lot of my prejudices what I had for other classes. Now that's not to say that I don't think there's still problems with the middle classes who punch down and look down on the working class, because that's fucking far from the case. But for my experiences, definitely there has been a lot of help for both classes. So I can't say much negatively about my journey in that respect. Good.
But it's different than if you're like going to like Edinburgh Uni just now is having a bit of a moment with their classism and all the posh students, because everyone's coming to light about the experience of the few working class people that are there, and just the massive gap between, you know, what they think is acceptable and the experience of going to somewhere like Edinburgh Uni when you're not a super rich posh person, you know.
Yep.
It's just massively different.
I struggled with that. I think if you do that was one of the reasons why after when I was doing my masters I never went to Glasgow. That and the fact that, I mean, they charge an extra fucking $2,000 for the masters compared to the other universities, but I felt that it wouldn't have really suited me. But saying that and knowing people in those institutions now, there is good people in them. But I can understand that perspective if you're going in as an undergrad, and there's middle class people and even some sort of more upper class people going to these universities as well, and it's kind of snarling and looking down at you. Coming from the background that I've came from, if that was my first experience, I don't think I would have handled it as well. No. I think I'd have really struggled. I think I needed that 2 years in college to socialise me into that environment of learning, and also listening and catering for different people and understanding different people's conditions and their own backgrounds as well. Because without that, I think I'd have struggled. I'd have definitely struggled going into Edinburgh or Glasgow or something and meeting these people for the first time, because it would just been alien to me. It would have just really been something that I'd not been used to, and I'd have. I think back then when I first got back into education, I was probably still a wee bit learning to re-socialise into civilian life, So I was kind of, aye, that would have played a role, I think.
Anyway, you're talking about getting chances and getting opportunities, and that, I think that goes back to the whole, your study of NED culture and stuff, and the dismissal of that is when you can dismiss a load of people or a group of people, right, even with its problems and with the violence and all the rest of it, you're also sort of creating an atmosphere where people don't feel the need to offer these individuals chances,
yep,
or even groups chances, and that you've got that extra hurdle in place to try and help people maybe get out of their situation, or to improve their situation in those sort of ways.
I see. This is always a difficult one for me, because I'm a great believer in the idea that I hate the term class ceiling. I hate the idea of class barriers. I don't think we should be challenging class ceilings and class barriers. I think we should be fucking breaking them down. We don't need class ceilings. We need to remove the whole, or demolish the whole fucking buildings in relation to that. But in terms of the context, the new, I think what's important is, as you say, about getting the chances. And I just need to look at, if you look at Dan McGarvey, he came for fuck all as well. Graham Armstrong had a rough time anyway. He got kicked out of school first, and then he screwed the head and he was able to go back in. That was an opportunity that a lot of people never got, but he's done amazing for that. So he would have been called a NED before. Dan maybe not so much a NED, but he certainly came from an environment where if people didn't know him, they probably would have still deemed him as a NED. Look what he's done. And then one of the boys that I know as well, Stephen Beattie, he was in the jail and that stuff, and now he's just finished his degree to be a doctor in general medicine. He's taught himself 2 languages, and now he's doing MMA as well alongside that. So he's challenging all these fucking stereotypes, and without those opportunities which people have had, like I spoke about, Graham got his opportunity through getting a second chance at education. Dan McGarvey, I think he kind of had to forge his way in, but again, publishers would have gave him that chance. So it's people for a different class giving you that chance, and then Stephen Beattie as well. Again, without somebody seeing something in him and gone, well, we're going to give you a shot at this, he wouldn't have been where he is now either. So I think it's important, as you say, that they can use those stereotypes against people to alienate them systemically, and that's why we do have a level of the sort of what people call as underclass. But what it isn't is an underclass. I don't agree with that term, but what I think they're doing is systemically creating a barrier towards you being seen as being the rest as everybody else. So it's basically categorisation individuals based up lines of morality, rather than anything to do with class or anything, because we all come from the same class. What the differences is the behaviours, the way some people talk, the way some people dress. We can go, well, we don't need to worry about them, they're the problem section. So it's a wrong type of working class, how people are perceived, and that's not by chance. I mean, that goes back to the 1800s and that, when people were getting called social scum, the dangerous classes, or the rest of it. I mean, NED, in my view, the way it was used, certainly before it got sort of reappropriated by NED culture, I think that it was used in the very same way as the dangerous classes, social scum, and all these terms, thug, hooligan, were used. It was used as to completely degrade and alienate, and systemically alienate people for getting certain accesses to regular society. And
then, as I said earlier, that just facilitates, the circle, that feedback loop of no improving the systems which cause it. And I mean, do you think it's getting better? Just to broaden this out a bit, and we'll talk about the state of the world. Well, maybe not the state of the world. That might be a bit too broad for this discussion. But maybe the state of Scotland just now, because we're seeing a lot of the same sort of poverty. We're seeing the same sort of systematic failures. The drug crisis, the alcohol crisis. It felt like for a while we were improving. It felt like a while we were actually improving as a society in Scotland. But I'm looking about, and it feels like the lessons haven't been learned at all.
No, there's certainly no. I mean, throughout time we always find new scapegoats. We always find new social problems to look at. And London right now is a good example, where a young sort of black youth, they're seen as being the new social problem, and they're presented as being worse than anything that's ever come before. And again, as you say, it's just about them creating those identities. It's basically, this is what we do with moral panics. We create a folk devil, we create certain behaviours and attributes which we play on these, and then this sensationalises it, and it creates this deviance amplification where the youth who are feeling more oppressed than they'd already been, coming for shit usually anyway in the first place, is they act up on it, so that then they become emboldened by their community, because out with their peers they've not got anybody else they can rely on, because everybody sees them as being bad and negative and everything that's wrong with society. And I think it must be even be a bit different for NEDS in the early 2000s, because like, it was a majority white population. If you're coming from a population that, well, you're black or a different sort of black, brown, different minority ethnic group, you're going to really feel that even more, I think, because it's not just something that you can take your trachea off and try and change your accent. It's something you look like. Do you know what I mean? It's your actual race. It's something that you can't escape. But I've always argued that it always comes back to class regardless, because the people who are creating these moral panics around the youth, be it black, brown, white, whatever, it's always the upper classes who are engineering it, and that's what's kind of forgotten about. And as you say, when we start normalising these systemic harms and we start normalising these narratives against them, you're justifying the oppressive approaches towards them at the same time. So, aye. And
it's something that we need to learn more as a society, to look at other countries who don't have that same, was it Darren called it a retributive culture, I think it was, or Britain's all about retribution, where we don't have that sort of approach, that punishment approach, which, you know, that links into the prison system, that links into the social services and everything like that, and just have a more understanding, you know, we live in this society together. We only, you know, exist together. So instead of perhaps creating, I suppose it's reflected in the capitalist system, which is punishing in and of itself, deliberately so. We need to be moving towards a society that doesn't do this, doesn't, you know, reinforce these systemic harms. And especially like the prison population, when you change that to different countries like Norway and Sweden and stuff, their approach is entirely different, because, you know, they understand, and as I said this to Darren, that you need to live with the people who come out. And so if your prison system's based on just, you know, retribution and reinforcing all of the systemic problems that got people into prison in a lot of cases, then that's just going to get replicated when they get out as well.
Well, I mean, there's obviously a big argument to have. I mean, if you look at our prison population since the early 2000s, it started really picking up during the war in NEDS. And that's by design. That's my argument. It's by design. It's not by chance that started happening. And that's because we've seen the introduction of private prisons for 1999. So the idea that it's just been steadily growing because we've become a more problematic society, in my opinion, is nonsense. I think it's because we've needed to supply and demand. If a prison's fucking lying there empty, they need to justify it. So what they've got to do, start sentencing more people. And now we're getting to the point where prisons are full, but they're starting to talk about new private prisons, which was the same narratives as back then. So that's why, in my view, we're kind of in stage sort of 2 or 3 moral panic right now, where the youth have already been identified as being a social problem. We've seen immigrants and that stuff being seen as being the social problem, and we're even starting to see in some of the places real hyper ghettos, where in the past I'd said that class was always the main factor within the schemes, but some of the schemes we're seeing now is getting really immigrant populations, they're just putting them in there, and these are places that are fucking really run down. They're not getting the same support as they would for the councils for some of the other areas in the city, and this is the engineering of hyper ghettos. And then we see the sort of extra or additional punishment of the poor. And again, it all ties back to Vacon's work, who covers all that stuff, and we've seen that already in France and Spain, places like this that have been had it for years. Scotland's starting to see the same. England definitely. England's been like that for a long time, but our immigration part is just getting more and more so. As you say, I mean, our prisons aren't there for rehabilitation. They're about fucking punishing people, and again, it's the punishment of the poor. It's the blaming them for the systemic failures that have occurred. And if you look at the rates as well, you look at the most people expelled for education. If you get expelled for education, you're 33% more likely to end up in prison. If you get expelled for school, like permanently excluded. So there's a failure there. I mean, people are getting kicked out of school. They're getting essentially sent out to produce a new underclass. And those new underclass are going to either fill your prisons, or they're going to fill your low wage jobs, or they're going to sell drugs and things like that just to keep themselves ticking by, because they can't get accepted into these regular roles. So what else are they supposed to do? Perish. So it's that aspect. There's a real failure, and although I think since my work in the early 2000s there has been a kind of cultural shift, and I think it does stem from like London and beyond, because you can look at a lot of the youth now, and you can look at London, you can look at America, you can look at even places in New Zealand and that, in Glasgow. There's a certain aesthetic now that looks the same, so we're maybe seeing a potential of sort of globalisation, but those same stigmas existing as a globalised form. Whereas before, you could have looked at these countries and you'd have seen different sort of cultural makeups and different sort of, subcultural makeups rather than just cultural, but sort of subcultural makeups were always slightly different. Whereas now it seems to be more homogenised through social media and that as well. So
that's an interesting point, because if you look at just wider culture just now, is going through a massive hegemonic shift, where everything feels the same and everything looks the same and everything's got the same aesthetic right across movies, TV, whatever it is. I think that's a really interesting point, that it's now affecting sort of real world sort of reflections of it. It's definitely. I mean, you look at the wee guys now, they all wear black. It's like uniformed. And as I said, if you look at America, London, places, New Zealand, Australia, all across the world, they're all looking the same aesthetic generally. And that's the way it's an accepted thing. And also we need to look at obviously the globalisation of the certain companies and multinational corporations who are able to sell these goods to the youth as well, who are profiting for these aesthetics, which are essentially marginalising or sort of emboldening these moral panics through the aesthetic narratives, or the narratives around the aesthetics as well. Again, you've got that dual sort of thing, where on the one hand you're condemning it, and on the other hand a lot of people making a lot of money from it.
That's it.
It's the difficulties. But a lot of the stuff we've touched on today is about, a lot of that, it really affects men. Most of the stuff, I would say, what you're talking about is it's mostly associated with men. And just, do you think there is, just to branch out a bit more, in this late stage capitalist system that we're living in, and we're living in a mental time, the past sort of 12 years I'd say have been just insane in terms of social media saturation, in terms of everything else that's happening in the world, and in terms of the sort of capitalism seems to have just ramped up in terms of its sort of hunger. Would you say, how do you think that's affecting sort of men, and maybe young men in particular?
I think that the left and the right are both to blame for this.
Right.
I think that there's been a big disconnect for young white men in what their left represents, and I don't think it's by design or anything like that. I just think that by emphasising those who are seen in the lowest of this sort of social hierarchy, we're almost forgotten about some of the lower white working class sometimes as well, because we've paid attention to, we're saying that the BLM, which was necessary, we needed to support those who are going through those racial struggles, the gender struggles as well. We've needed to support people going through that. That's of all manner of LGBTQ, and that the emphasis has been on them for a while as well. And any time I remember this online, people saying, well, it's not your turn to speak, it's not your turn, it's time to listen. But who has been speaking for the lower white working class young boys especially? So there's a lot of detachment there, I feel, and I don't think it's sort of badness. I think it's just because people trying to do right, try to do good for other people, and we've kind of forgotten there's other populations there as well. And I don't necessarily think that it does mean that those young white working class boys are being represented. I don't think it means they're not being represented. But what I think is it potentially feels like that for them. And that alienation almost, and no being feeling as if you're part of the conversation or part of the discussion. If you're not feeling part of the discussion, you're not being part of the conversation, you're going to go to where somebody is making you part of that conversation. And unfortunately what we have is demagogues who are using that space to exploit and saying, well, we represent you as a young white guy, but this is what a young white guy should be like. They should be this hyper-masculine, toxic, misogynist. And they're doing it in ways that are also they're doing it in ways that are also they're cunning as well. I mean, these people aren't stupid. If you look at Andrew Tate, for example, and this is something that not a lot of people actually, I've not actually heard anybody saying this before, but if you think of Hitler's other name, and this is not to compare Andrew Tate with Hitler or Mussolini, because obviously they're horrible cunts, but they're not quite the same. Hitler created this notion of the Führer, Mussolini, Il Duce. If you look at Andrew Tate, he's created this other pseudonym for himself, Top G, and that buys into the whole sort of the Übermensch idea. It's about creating this character to build on and represent other men, and that's by design. That's Nietzsche's work as well, and that's what he spoke about specifically. So I think that these are cunning people who are able to exploit. They're doing it for monetary terms as well, of course. I mean, it's, as we spoke about before, it's all about money. You follow the money and you'll find out the reason why a lot of these people are coming up with these narratives. And now we're seeing it on a political basis as well. When we're seeing the rise of the reform, we're seeing the rise of sort of Trump in America as well. Although Trump, I think, is more complex because there's a lot of alienation there within a lot of the communities. But certainly for young white men, and even young sort of Asian and black men as well are looking to these people as well and thinking that's what a man is. I think that's something where the left is missing. We're not presenting these alternative looks at what a man is, so to speak. So we're not saying, well, a man can be masculine, a man can be it doesn't matter what a man is, masculine, non-masculine, you can go to the gym, you don't need to go to the gym. But the main thing is that you're not inflicting harms on other people. So it's about gaining a narrative where, well, how far do we support our youth? Do we say that, do we include them in certain conversations, or would they keep them removed from conversations? I think it's a difficult one, because representation is always something that it's always been a sticky thing through time. How do you represent people? Who represents people? And the identity politics stuff that we're seeing now, I think, is a big driver for why so many are feeling alienated, because those who do represent the white is sort of being that which is negative, and that's problematic.
Yep, and then you've got, just speaking of, because class is, as you said, class is a massive sort of missing component to a lot of this stuff. And if you're, a poor white kid who has no opportunities, who has nothing, and, arguably for the past 10 years, you've been getting told you've either been not allowed to speak, or you're getting told you're the problem. You've got privilege, and yeah, white privilege exists. I'm not saying it doesn't, but if you're talking about how you feel on an individual basis and in your society, and you're not feeling connected, and you're not feeling like you have a future, you're going to gravitate towards people, and you're going to gravitate towards people who are going to at least listen to you. And I think over the past 10 years, the left has really dismissed these people, and you're not going to feel like you have privilege.
Right.
It's like, I've got nothing. How can you say that I've,
I think a lot of the narratives in it, this is a part of the detachment. So you're getting a lot of these people who talk about privileges and things like that, and they're right to, because there is a certain white privilege in some places. I don't really think it exists, maybe it exists now, but didn't really exist back like 20 years ago, when the majority of the population, there was not that much migration in the same way there is in England and the likes. But I think there's that detachment. You get people who are going to university and they're learning about these things, and then they're going on social media and they're talking about it and saying, well, actually, you're the problem. But nobody's educating the lower classes about these kind of things, because they're not getting the same access to education. So that detachment's coming in, and education in that sense is being used as a divisive tool in many respects. So it's dividing people up these racial lines, dividing these people up gender lines and that. Whereas a real class analysis would say, well, actually, you're all getting fucked by the same system. And although it's important to align, although it's important to recognise our identities, because that's a big part of who we are, we also, to challenge a system, it's very difficult to do that when you're divided up these different lines. And that's where the class analysis is really missing in that respect. And I feel, again, that's where people are being left out. They're feeling they're not part of those conversations. And it's easy to see why. I mean, we're using certain academic and university terminology and certain theories that are rooted in universities. And for my view as well, I think there's a lot of academic entrepreneurship that is getting expressed by certain populations, and that's creating a problem for a lot of these young people because they've not been educated to that level. And I'm not saying that it's because they're stupid or whatever else. It's because there's a sort of space missing between the connection between the language. So a lot of the people they're saying stuff, if they'd broken it down and explained it and expressed it properly, a lot of the people who are getting angry about it would probably agree with them. It's just it's been used almost as a tool to beat them with. Like you're just rejecting it. So everything becomes really binary in the sense that we don't really try to articulate these things anymore. It's all about, are you a good guy or a bad guy? And that's I think that's societally, that's a problem. And you see this kind of left pole of righteousness almost. If you don't follow this straight line in every single way, you're going to get cancelled for that or cancelled for that. Whereas the right, this is why they're so successful, is because they'll make excuses for why people are acting certain ways that don't align with their right ideology. So you could be a fucking demagogue, you could be racist, misogynist, all the rest of it. All the right are saying is, I don't agree with everything they're saying, but they speak a lot of truth. You're like, well, what truths are they speaking? And that's how they get run it. I mean, you're seeing them support like fucking Russell Brand and that stuff and all.
Allegedly.
Maybe beep that out for me as well. I don't want to get fucking sued.
Allegedly.
But beep that one out for us. So you're seeing people like this who are being supported because they're seen to follow certain ideas which are aligned with the right, but they're a lot of the other stuff is toxic and horrible, and people know that it's toxic and horrible, but they're the only people who they believe represent them, and that's part of the problem. So I think we need to bring it back to class. We also need to bring it back to having a wider representation. I know that it's good to have these different identities represented, but we also need to make sure everybody is included in it, and that doesn't just go for young white guys, that goes for young white women, it goes for young black men, young sort of Asian men, women, and everybody included. And I think that's a very difficult thing to do. I mean, who's going to lead that?
It is even us having this discussion would put us into a particular, or other people might put us into a particular bracket of the culture war or what have you, and use that to dismiss what we're saying purely on the basis of what we're talking about just now.
I don't know. I don't think so. I think people are pretty receptive in that respect. I'm quite.
I need to meet the people you've been talking to.
No. I think as long as you're trying to articulate yourself in a way that's not offensive and it's not harmful to anybody. I mean, we're having a discussion. Just because we're having a discussion, we've still got stuff to learn as well. And I think if you're open and receptive to that, people are kind of open and receptive to what you're saying as well at the same time. And I think that's what it's all about. It's all about having these discussions without doing it in an offensive manner, articulating yourself without using language that is exclusive or offensive. And a lot of people will say, oh, I've got a right to be offensive. Well, just because you've got a right to doesn't mean you need to fucking do it. Do you know what I mean? That's always my view. I always kind of try to understand other people's positions, because just because we've got this, we're not fucking fountains of knowledge ourselves, you know what I mean?
But then to push back on that a little bit, do you not think that there are instances quite a lot where that is then weaponised to shut people down, particularly in a lot of the stuff that you're talking about? The manner in which people speak and all the rest of it is deemed to be offensive to a lot of people.
Of course, but where is this happening? It's happening mainly online. And when you come into the real world, a lot of people aren't having these conversations. Do you know what I mean? A lot of people aren't bothering their arse with a lot of this shit that people are saying, oh, he's this, she's that, and there's this kind of that binary society doesn't really exist in the real world, and if it does, I think it's shut down pretty quickly, especially when you're involved in workplaces with different people for different backgrounds. I think those sort of imaginary angles that are produced online are kind of diluted in society.
Do you think I'd push back again on that a little bit? I should have pushed back when Darren said that, but we are seeing instances, like you look in the summer, we are seeing instances where that sort of stuff does bleed out into the world, and it does cause sort of real harm. So how would we?
What example?
The riots in the summer, the
Aye, but that is something that's a material reason for it. I mean, somebody was murdered and people got uproar through that. So although the propaganda happened at an online level, it also happened in the old media terms as well, like through the way it's always happened. So I think we're maybe placing too much emphasis on that as an online problem, because that's something that did happen on a material level, and people were outraged and people were able to get shaped with a real narrative of what happened and how it happened. And that's been the case since the beginning of time. The ruling classes have always been able to shape the narrative. It's just that now with social media being there, it's where in the past you might have been on a train or a bus and you've picked up a newspaper and you're like, oh, look at that story, that's really bad. Now you're getting a phone and you're seeing a story and you're reading it, you're scrolling, you're seeing another story, you're seeing another story, all the same narratives, because your algorithms are producing these same stories. They want you to follow these same narratives. So that's kind of like it's just intensifying that same level of media, which would have been lesser in the past. But as I say, the foundations are the same. It's still a class struggle, and it's all about division of the masses. And I think these people who are able to produce these papers and these articles, they've got more power to do it now. But as I say, the fundamentals are generally the same. So when these things are happening on a material level, I think it was always going to be the case, I think, anyway, especially when you're getting like mass migration and people are able to shape that. Again, it comes down to who controls the narrative and how do we challenge those narratives as well at the same time. And I don't think there's any one side that are right or wrong completely. I think there's truths in every sort of argument, unless you're going for complete racism and misogyny and all the rest. I think it's bollocks. I think it's just an inferiority complex where a lot of people are using this stuff to vent through. But I think that shutting people down and denying them is being completely wrong, or saying somebody's completely right isn't the way to go about it, because even if you're a Marxist, Marxism's all about dialogue. I mean, that's the whole point of the work that he'd done. It's dialectical and historical materialism. Dialectics is clashes, conflict, and then moving forward. Right now, we're not really having these clashes and conflicts because we're not having a lot of dialogue, which is conflicting when you're getting people choosing these sides. So we need to have those conflicting narratives to move forward. Or if you're a Marxist, at least that's the view. So that's my view, always has been.
I think one of the things that seems to be coming back up while we're doing this is getting people in a room and talking and taking it out of those sort of algorithmic your algorithmic feeds and the binariness and the polarisation that's happening on there. Because it sort of strips away a lot of human interaction and how we speak to one another. But a lot of people, I think, are trapped in that just now. Especially, I think, young guys just now are sort of... You see, I don't know if you pay attention, I forget the term, there's a Japanese term for it. For a young guy who's like checked out of society. I can't remember what it's called. Hikamuri? I want to say Hikamuri. I might be wrong.
Don't talk Japanese. Unfortunately.
Probably offended Japan. We apologise. But, they're experiencing a real sort of crisis where so many people are checking out of society and just living sort of online in these realms without the human interaction, without the bonding, without I think we were talking earlier on about the, prehistoric sort of humans. You'd have your community, you'd have your sort of influences, specifically like masculine influences.
Well, I mean, that the online echo chambers for these manospheres, as you put it, as I would say, they've always existed, but now they're existing online, so it's easier access for a lot of people, where in the past it would have been the old fucking beer halls and things like that, like obviously with Hitler going along and Danny's big speech. Well, I mean, when you're talking about masculinity and you're talking about fucking demagogues and you're talking about these horrible people in the past, that's always a good reference, I would say. So I think that's the issue now. So you're getting these people and they're becoming further entrenched in these ideals, and as you say, you're losing touch of material reality. But again, that's an alienation produced at a societal level. So we might look at it and say, oh, wow, they're removed from society in that respect, but they're still part of society. They're just being they're feeling that rejected fate, and that's a flaw, not just in the left, but a structural and systemic level as well. Because I think that the government and the local government, the local councils and that stuff, they all know this stuff is all going on, and they should have an emphasis on trying to change that. Now, if you started creating different leisure spaces, that's created more access to amenities and different forms of leisure, and also community bonding, which is something that's completely removed. I mean, if you look at this manosphere stuff, it's a strange retreat into a community, even though you're doing it as an individual. Because of this sort of, the right champion these individualists, they go, and as I said about Andrew Tate being this Ubermensch idea, it's all about individualism, and it's all about sort of catering for yourself and becoming an entrepreneur, becoming rich through this, that. But these people are retreating essentially to online communities. So there is that desire to be part of that community.
Yep.
Now, if the reason why as a society that's happening is because we're telling people that individualism is the way forward, and we're removing and we're smashing the schemes down. A lot of the schemes getting demolished for the past, and we're now seeing these individual houses being put up, where in the past you'd have had closes, you'd have had flats, and people bonding together as communities on a material basis. So I think there's a real human desire for people to be part of something and be part, and because that has been removed through neoliberalism and the attempt to sort of individualise every single person, so they can't challenge things on a material basis, i.e. the end of the unions as well in the sort of late 80s and all that stuff. I think that's all tied, I think it's all related, and this is a kind of kickback to it. So what we need to try and do is create spaces within our communities, a grassroots approach to it, go around the doors, get people out and go, look, you might have a different view for us, you might think our politics are bollocks compared to yours, but there's a space for you here to be involved in and shape things within your community. If you want to change things in a certain direction, do it, get along and get them involved. And even just getting people along a couple of times and hearing different perspectives and different opinions, people's horizons are broadened. And I think that's something that ties in with my work. So when people were involved in NED culture and they started going on social media and stuff like that, it wasn't that they were staying in the house more that made them fall away from NED culture. It was the fact that they'd seen new styles, they'd seen new opinions, they'd seen there's a new world out there, essentially, that they had never been part of because they never had the access through economics to do it. So I think that's the same, it's a similar sort of respect to what we've got going on now.
I think we'll wrap up there.
Cool.
Excellent. Well, thanks for coming in, man. I really appreciate it.
Hope you've fucking freezing in here, by the way.
You need gloves on. You need gloves on.
I'm freezing, man.
Right. Well, we'll wrap up there. That's been episode 4 of Tickling the Void podcast. And again, I'll plug the Patreon. If you want to see us continue, if you want to see us get self-sustaining, then please consider becoming a member. Patreon.com/Tickling the Void. And I think we'll just leave it there. That's been Gavin Brewis. Gavis. Right, I got 2 things there. I got your name wrong and I also sounded like a TV presenter. That's been Gavin Brewis and I've been Sean. Right, we'll not do that. Anyway, cheers for coming in, Gary. See you later. Gary. Right, Gavin. I can talk. I'm capable of talking. See you later.
It feels good, man. It feels good, right? Yo. I'm in the light at the end of the tunnel. Paper stacks, yeah, I got them in the bundles. Harry Potter breaking bread with the muggles. They said I wouldn't make it, now they looking puzzled. They said I wouldn't take it, I'd go and hustle. Get the bag, it ain't never getting fumbled. In the jack, but we came up from the bottom. Through the cracks, let the light pour in. Have a blast, let the drinks pour in. Take a risk like it's a short thing. Going in, yeah, I'm going all in. Getting flued out, yeah, you can bring your friend. Dive right in, let's go. Move forward and dip in your toes. Let the rhythm take control. It's going down tonight, yeah. Dive right in, let's go. Move forward and dip in your toes. Let the rhythm take control. It's going down tonight, yeah. I just do see you later, no goodbyes. New flows, new highs. Through the dark clouds, see the blue skies. It will be I-J-U-A. It's a new day. Ride in the storm like a new wave. Shake, shake, shake.